All right, here we go. Light this incense. Welcome back to the podcast. Holy shit, I just burnt my finger. That was really hot. I was talking to one of my friends the other day, and she's actually a therapist, and now she helps people to do podcasts, which I kind of love. She has this amazing show. Her name's Gloria, by the way, and her show is called the Inner Child Podcast. Got a couple of million downloads, I believe. She's done really well with the show. We sat down the other day and we were talking about podcasting. And believe it or not, I mean, she joined one of our podcasting programs years ago to help her make more money. Just love a little incense in the morning. And she did really well with this show. It really took off. She was consistent. She got booked. You know, one of the things that we were talking about was, how should I do the theme of these shows? And, you know, we were talking through and we were talking about concepts and things that we could do. And what it ultimately landed on was, you as a brand, you know, are enough. I wanted to have this really unique concept. I wanted to have something that stood out. Didn't want to have a boring, generic, quote unquote, business show. And actually what we landed on was, you know, just us as individuals are incredibly unique. You know, the fact that I live in Costa Rica, the fact that we have traveled a lot in the last 9 years as I've been building businesses, the fact that we do podcasting as our main method to get clients, the fact that, you know, I like rock climbing and we got 2 dogs and we're trying to grow stuff in our garden fairly unsuccessfully. You know, the fact that I've spent a lot of time working on myself and trying to deepen my relationship with myself and get some of the patterns and beliefs that I've had over the years out of the way so that I can actually grow this business and get out of my own way. It's all really unique. You know, and there's a pretty good chance if you're listening, you know, you're probably a business owner. Maybe you've had these thoughts as well, these self-doubt thoughts perhaps about, you know, is what I'm going to put out really going to be good enough? Is it going to be the right thing? And ultimately what we came back to was, yeah, I mean, it probably is going to be enough just to put yourself out there and to talk about stuff. And so I think this is a fitting introduction of what I want to talk about today, because we've really seen marketing shift in the last couple of years. And I don't know if it's because we're in the year of the fire horse now. I had a call with a lady yesterday and she's like, it's the year of the fire horse. My word for the year is giddy up, right? Time to get going. You know, we really need to realize that you don't have to do things in the way that everybody tells you have to do them. And you can actually grow your business and market in a way that feels authentic to you. And I struggled with this for a while. And I want to talk today about some of the new things that we're seeing emerging in marketing for 2026. And I want to take you through, you know, the evolution of some of the stuff that we've done in our own company in Media Firestorm, and how things have shifted and where we're kind of going, and one of the reasons that I'm sat down today recording this piece of content to connect with you. And so if we go back to 2019 to 2022, when I had my first proper business, I say first proper business because I had about 5 or 6 before that failed. It was the first time that I'd really had any success. And one of the things that I had heard at a conference was, you need to have a podcast. And the idea was, it gives you credibility, it gives you the ability to connect with people, you can interview people that you never before would have thought that maybe you'd be able to get into the room with. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And I tried it, and I was able to launch my show and figure some stuff out. It was called the Entrepreneur Junkie Movement. I later changed the name of the show to Change Makers with Jamie Atkinson. And it worked pretty good. And somebody said to me, you know, Jamie, you should help people launch podcasts. And so in 2019, I did that. And we launched the Podcast Profit Lab. And we got it going for the first time. And for the first couple of years in that business, we did really well. I got the business to 6 figures and then multi-6 figures. And then we eventually hit 7 figures for the business. But it really struggled to get things working consistently. And we bounced between lots of different methods. You know, we had a podcast for ourselves. We had a podcast that one of our team members had. Her name is Brittany. And she did this amazing show where she interviewed individuals, and we got a lot of leads and sales and clients from that process. But one of the things that didn't make a ton of sense to me at the time was just that we kept bouncing from thing to thing, and what was missing was actually like an internal growth thing. I just wasn't where I needed to be in order to grow the business. And then we started a new business. We started Media Firestorm in 2023. We shifted markets because we figured that content was becoming so important And podcasting was such an easy medium for you to sit down and have a conversation, especially in an interview format. Even now, as I'm doing this video, this is very much a talking head video. I'm sitting down, I'm having a conversation, like I'm imagining that you're sat, right across from me. Bit one-sided, isn't it? I should really give you the chance to speak. But an interview was a lot more naturally flowing. People ask questions, you give thoughts and insights. You don't really have to plan what you're going to talk about. And it was a whole lot less work than what we were doing with clients to get them to launch their podcast. I was on a podcast just yesterday, and I was talking to this lady about how she runs her podcast, and it gives her very little direct money. It takes all of this time and energy. She has a production team that has to edit the episodes. She's got a schedule she has to stick to every week. And she gets a lot out of it. Credibility, connections, content that's going out there. But boy, is it a lot of work, to put all of that content out there. And so we shifted to getting booked on shows because we had this giant network. We had Need a Guest, this Facebook group. Had 10,000 members when we first started. 75,000 today. It's been growing like crazy. And I realized inside of this process that, podcast guesting was a lot easier, to get booked on. But that wasn't enough on its own for us to be able to grow and scale the company. We needed to do more. We needed more marketing activities out there. And so we ended up with a combination of a few different things. We had podcast episodes that we would get booked on. We had daily emails that we would send out so that once people became leads, we would turn them into customers. And we also started doing some more leveraged cold outbound. And we picked cold emails as a platform. A lot of people do Facebook ads. And we had this combination of these two different modalities. We had sort of the stabilizing marketing system, which was everything that was free and everything that was very warm. So that would be podcast content, any videos that you might do on social media, email marketing. It doesn't cost us any money, but costs us time to put out there. And for us specifically, we did podcast guesting and we did email marketing. And then on the other side of the coin, from stabilized, you've got more leveraged acquisition systems, things like Facebook ads, cold emails. And so we had a combination of these two. And we were able to grow and scale the business. We're now at the biggest level the business has ever been at for us, which is really exciting. I remember years ago dreaming of having $1 million business, and now we're there. We got a business that does a couple million a year. And as always in business, we have a new goal, right? We're scaling up. We're trying to get the business to 8 figures, $1 million a month. But one of the things that we've noticed is that the market has shifted. And perhaps this is something that you've noticed as well. Right now, we do around about 400 sales calls just direct from cold outbound. So we send about 3 million cold emails. We get people that are interested. They come through a call booking funnel. They show up for calls. We talk to them about how Media Firestorm works. And then, some people buy on the call. Some people take, 10, 14 days to decide. Some people come back, 90 days later. And that method has worked good for us, alongside with the podcast content we put out and sending emails. But it's gone a lot harder. And this might be something that you've been experiencing in your own journey in marketing. Sales calls have become a little bit tougher. And if you think about like the old way that we've always done this in the marketing world, you sell something that's expensive and high ticket, you get people to come and book in for a call. That method still works today, but it's not new. A lot of people have experienced it. And so when you think about the types of buyers now that are coming into your call process, they absolutely are not high ticket virgins. Somebody has already tried to sell them something expensive before, and they've probably gone through a lot of versions of that. The sophistication of those customers has gone up. When you also look at, the model of calls, when people used to get on sales calls before, that in itself was like a trust builder and a verification. Now, a lot of people won't even get onto a call with you until they trust you. And a lot of this has come around from the advent of how TikTok changed the marketing space. We went from social media to interest media. And so now more than ever, people are being served content that's interesting to them. And they're consuming that before they come through and buy. And so whereas content used to be this optional thing that was nice to have, that really helped you in the marketing process, but you could still do really well, in cold markets, now it's becoming integral. And we've always had content first as a mindset in our company, but we've never before put as much focus on it as what we do today. And I wanted to talk about this because many of you may be experiencing these similar struggles, and we've been sharpening our tools. And so our sales team is getting better. We're doing more drills around discovery processes and making customers feel good. We've got, content that we send people inside of the funnel after somebody books a call. We've got emails that go out before the call, text message, automations, and also manual text messages personalized from the sales reps. There's all of this really cool advanced stuff that we've been adding in, but it feels kind of like a band-aid, right? It's still, even with all of this really cool marketing systems and marketing complexity, isn't as easy as it used to be without all of that stuff. And that's where brand comes into play. And this is exactly why we're doing videos like this. When we're creating this content, not only do we find the right people that connect with us, around our energy, the way we talk, but also we're able to help people see, gaps inside of the marketplace and really just connect with people. They can figure out whether they can trust a person before they want to take that call. And so if you've been noticing this shift in the market, I want you to take a step back and look at how much is brand playing a part in the way that you market right now. And, for us as a company, we're still using more leveraged tools like Facebook ads or cold email or cold outbound. We're still bringing new people into the process, but we're doing it in a different way. We're making brand and content the epicenter of every single thing that we get customers to touch. And so, for example, where we used to send a cold email that would say, hey, do you want to get booked on, 20 high quality podcasts in 90 days? And we'd have some level of interest and we'd push them to book a call. Now we're sending emails around the videos that we create. Hey, have you seen this video where we talk about the new thing that's happening in marketing? And we start with content. And so this new sort of process that we've been really focusing around is really about content first. And it's kind of the reason that we started this company in the first place, was to give people a way to create content in a really easy manner. To be interviewed, to have conversations, to be really deep. We could talk all day about how much easier it is to do an interview. It takes less time. They take care of all the editing in the process. You really don't have to prep and think about what you're going to talk about. It's just a conversation that comes through. But I think what it really comes down to is understanding what was once optional is no longer really optional. And if you think about it, if something is no longer optional, then if you can do 100 times more of that effort and energy than you did before, and this is the one thing that's going to make all things easier, then why would you not put as much energy as you possibly could into that process? And so, candidly, this is what we're doing more of as a company. When you look at beginning of 2026, we were doing 1 email a day. We're sending 2.5 million emails a month at the beginning of 2026. We were producing 2 podcast interviews per week. And in December, I started doing, 1 YouTube video a week. But we actually stopped doing that because we lost an editor and we got out of the process. And now we're going to be doing a whole lot more of all of that stuff. Because if we can just put out more content in a way that feels authentic, and we can do that consistently, and we can make that content something that all of our customers see before they come into a process with us, they're just all the more likely to get what we're talking about and to understand how the offer aligns. And so there's a whole marketing ecosystem that goes behind all of these things. But the one thing that I always say to our clients, and the one thing I say to a lot of people, and even to myself, is just look at the amount of volume that you're doing when it comes to creating content. And if it isn't where you want it to be, do more of it. This is exactly why I'm sitting down and doing this podcast episode today. Before, when I was talking with Gloria, I was so worried about getting it right. I was so worried about making it perfect. I was so worried about it being the best version it could possibly be that I didn't actually do anything. I didn't put it out there. And even though we've been doing these interviews and we've got these, pieces of content going out, I know in my heart of hearts, I could be playing that game at a much, much higher level. And I could be doing a lot more volume. And so this is why we're doing this episode today. I guarantee you that this episode will be significantly worse than the one that gets put out in September of this year and the one that gets put out in December of this year, because I've done a lot more reps, I've done a lot more volume. And whereas before we were really obsessing over getting everything perfect, now we're really focusing on just doing more and knowing it's going to get better over time. And so from a content strategy perspective, when we do a podcast interview now, those interviews are going to come onto this podcast that you're listening to. When I do an interview or I do a conversation like this with the camera, we're also going to put that on YouTube. And there's a lot of ways that we're going to be repurposing that content. But overall, if I'm doing, let's say, 2 podcast interviews a week, maybe I sit down and do a 20-minute episode like this every day. Maybe I do a little dedicated YouTube video once a week as well, specifically for YouTube, and I get a proper editor because YouTube has its own way that it likes these things. It's just a whole lot more than what we've been putting out before. And so in other episodes, we'll maybe talk some more about how our strategies are shifting, what we're looking at. But just like we've always done, we're not going anywhere near social media. We ditched social media years ago. 2023. We're not doing that game. We're not playing that game of social media anymore because you don't have to be successful. We've built this business to where we are just with interviews and emails. And in order to take the brand to the next level where things get easier, we will be shifting some things. We'll be shifting how we produce content. We'll be shifting how we sell in our conversion systems. And we'll also be shifting how we get customers to the point where they're ready to buy. And some of our offerings as well is probably going to change. And we can talk about each of those individual things in other episodes. But for today, the main thing I want you to really ask yourself is, how has your brand evolved and how is it different from businesses that were doing this in 2019 or 2020? Because today, it is a lot different. I sat down and looked at a timeline of Alex Hermosa the other day, and he launched acquisition.com, I think, in 2022, which means that company has been running for 4 years now. And he's been doing consistent daily content on multiple platforms for that entire time. But he also was doing the game for at least 2 to 3 years before that. And Jim launched Secrets, which was the podcast before the game, for another couple of years before that as well. And all the way back there in 2019 and 2020, when he was running all these ads and doing all these things, what he found was that the people that bought Jim Launch, most of them had already consumed 3 or 4 pieces of the content. And when you look today at the business owners that are doing the best, that have sold out programs and growing businesses and are expanding beyond anything that you might be thinking is even possible for yourself, at the center of every one of those strategies is content. It's micro niche fame, right? Being famous within your specific industry because you put that stuff out there. I look at business owners like Jeremy Haynes, Alex Hermosi, Taki Moore, lots of these business owners that we look up to that have 8-figure and 9-figure businesses and are really successful within the internet marketing space. Every single one of them, their main driver, it's things like podcast interviews, podcast episodes, YouTube content. And sure, they have shorts here and there, but the backbone of what really creates trust and interest and gets them to where they are, it's really that idea of like micro fame within the content that they produce. So I want you to sit with that. Think about it. And if you do nothing else from this video, just ask the question of, how could I just be doing more volume in a way that feels easy? And hey, if you need some help with that, go to needaguest.com, check some links down below. Maybe our Media Firestorm process to get you booked on podcasts might help. And maybe not. Either way, if we think it'll help you or if we won't, we'll tell you. And we just have a simple application process if you think that might be the right fit. All right, looking forward to doing more of these casual, sit back, incense-filled podcast episodes. Hope you enjoyed this. If you're listening to this on YouTube or a podcast, maybe subscribe, like the video, drop me a comment. Let me know what you think about these style of episodes. And we'll see you maybe in the next one. Bye.